What does a traveller from another sun sound like as it drifts past our quiet night? Perhaps like a breath against a window, soft and even, with a faint silver hush that lingers at the edge of hearing. The dome above us is calm, and the instruments are unblinking, and somewhere in that stillness a new name has joined the ledger of passing guests. We will meet it without hurry, with a lantern-warm patience, and follow its trace the way you follow a shoreline in moonlight. I'll speak gently and keep the pace unknotted. No leaps, no jolts. Only a steady walk through what we know and what we infer, keeping the tone low enough that your shoulders can drop and your breathing can stretch. Tonight is not for conclusions. Tonight is for listening. Before we go, make a small circle of quiet around yourself. Set your phone to do not disturb. If headphones help, nestle them lightly and lower the volume until my voice feels like a hand resting on the table beside you. If you like to drift to long stories, cue the Sleepy Science playlist so the night can carry you without reaching back to the screen. I'll guide you through a sequence of gentle doors: arrival, motion, chemistry, light, each opening to a wider, softer room. We will keep the language plain, the metaphors thin as paper, and the facts settled where they are most at ease. When a detail invites wonder, we'll let it glow quietly rather than flare. Settle in. The dome is ready, the notes are arranged, and the sky is clear enough for a careful look. We begin softly with the visitor's first footprint. July 3rd, 2025, just after local midnight in the Chilean winter. A small cluster of pixels shifts between frames, and an automated watcher at Atlas flags the change with a modest ping. It is not loud, not cinematic, only the tidy rhythm of sky survey images stepping forward, and a point of light that refuses to fit the usual patterns. I remember the way such moments feel in a control room. The air is cool on the cheeks, the monitors glow low, and you hear the quiet click of a keyboard when someone locks a frame and leans closer. We were not waiting for a legend. We were simply keeping time with the sky. The first notes say trajectory, then speed, then shape of the path. A curve becomes a question, and then the question hardens into a number, an eccentricity greater than 1, hyperbolic, not returning. The mind does a small, polite recalibration. You are looking at a visitor, not a neighbour, and your breath lengthens as if the room has widened by a few degrees. We speak of interstellar as if it were thunder, but it arrives more like frost. A thin outline around familiar things, a faint blue halo at the edge of the known. The designation follows the rules, tidy as a label on a folder. The third of its kind confirmed, after a long interval of expectation since Oumuamua and Borisov. The ledger gains a calm new line, and the telescopes begin to share the hour. What does a footprint mean for something that never lands? It means a sequence of confirmations and the quiet discipline of teams who prefer data to drama. The minor planet center receives positions, fittings tighten. The unbound path is no longer a rumor but a shared coordinate system, and a dozen instruments tilt in sympathy without any need for urgency. In the days that follow, the sky offers angles like a slow turning map. From Earth, the motion is understated, the brightness modest, the coma a pale hush in long exposures. From Mars, geometry lends another view, and later in the season, those images will deepen the sense that this is simply a traveller, doing what travellers do near a sun, warming, shedding, writing its brief calligraphy in dust and gas. I keep the language soft because the facts are capable of carrying themselves. Closest approach to our planet will be comfortably far. The pass by the sun has already come and gone on a safe outside track. Yet, scarcity gives value to each minute we watch. There have only been 3 of these, and they do not loop back for second drafts. Think of a harbour in early morning when the tide is even and the moored boats turn their bows the same way. That is how a good observing plan feels when an object like this appears. Windows open, close, and overlap. Spectrographs are chilled, cameras scheduled, and the handoffs between missions become a kind of tide table, written in light hours rather than miles. A visitor's first footprint is not a single print at all. It is a pattern of attention, established quickly and held gently. We mark the calendar with a few anchor times: the night of discovery in Chile, the later moment of perihelion on the far side of the sun, the date when Earth and comet share their most neighbourly distance, and we agree to meet those times with clear eyes and unhurried hands. If you step outside now, you would not see a showy brushstroke across the sky. You would feel the steadiness instead. The same steadiness that makes long listening possible and long watching reliable. Somewhere above, the faint blue halo continues its measured crossing, indifferent to our metaphors, kind to our instruments, generous to our questions. For us, the first footprint is acceptance. Acceptance that wonder can be quiet, that rarity does not require alarm, and that a story can begin without a trumpet, only with a timestamp and a shared breath in a room of careful light. We begin here and we continue patiently, because patience is how the traveller comes into focus. Quiet assertion, or still field under winter sky, thin frost on the dome rail, and in the corner of one frame a pale green trace holds steady against the drift. Atlas works for nights like that. 4 wide-eye telescopes, 2 on Hawaiian volcanoes, 1 in South Africa, 1 in Chile, swing and settle and swing again, stitching the visible sky into overlapping tiles. Their task is humble and heroic at once. Notice what moves, measure it cleanly, and pass the note to the wider choir before the night is over. The cadence is automatic, but never careless. You feel it in the room as a soft metronome of exposures, readouts, repoints. When a new point of light writes a short diagonal across successive frames, the system does not gasp. It timestamps, compares, and asks the first simple question. Does this motion belong to something nearby or something far? Then the message begins. Its quiet journey through the chain we've built for exactly this purpose. Coordinates head to the minor planet center. Preliminary fits are shared, and other instruments angle their mirrors to take a look. No alarms, only procedure, and that is its own kind of comfort. Hyperbolic is a gentle word in this context. It means the curve does not close. Eccentricity greater than 1, the mathematics of not coming back. For sleep, we keep the language plain. The traveller is unbound to our sun, and will keep going once it has warmed and brightened and drifted past. The number is a signature more than a verdict, and it tells the teams which models to reach for, which expectations to set aside, and how to pace their nights. Soon, you can feel the community lean in. An observatory in the north checks the same field when it rises. A mid-latitude scope slides a spectrograph into place. Someone starts the familiar search for pre-discovery images, those earlier glimpses that were captured before anyone knew where to look. Precoveries, we call them, and they lengthen the story backward by days or weeks, tightening the orbit and lowering the uncertainty so that every later minute is better spent. The trail in those old images is often faint, but the value is bright. A longer arc of data means smaller error bars and more accurate windows. You'll hear the word cadence used with care here. It means we do not simply point once and hope. We plan a pattern, a cluster of measurements, then a pause to process, then another cluster, when the angle, the sun, and the rotation all line up to reveal something new. Think of a studio light warming through its dimmer, hunting for the tone that makes the color true. Atlas, its name a promise to shoulder the load, was built to survey and share. It can see an entire hemispheric sky in a single night, to a depth that catches faint comets like this one while they are still far. The Chile station carries the southern winter with it. The air is steady, the mountain cold, and the camera works the O-band with patient repetition while the operator watches for clouds and the computers do their counting. A ping is never a performance. It is a polite knock on the next door in the chain. The knock is answered in Boston time by the Minor Planet Center, in Pasadena by JPL Orbit, Fitters, in Hawaii by the survey team that started the whisper. By the end of the first day, dozens of measurements trace the same unbound path. Labels are formalized, temporary strings giving way to a tidy interstellar designation, and the schedule of who looks when is set like a tide table. We will not be close to danger. We will, instead, be close to understanding, which is the safer of the two nearnesses. If you hold out your hand, imagine a postage stamp of sky resting on your palm. In that space, the object is little more than a smudge, but even a smudge can carry a lot of meaning when you know what it's doing. The coma is a faint veil. The tail, at first, a suggestion. The spectrum, in time, begins to separate into familiar lines, the way a quiet chord separates into its notes when you listen long enough. Nothing here is theatrical. Everything here is precise. Precoveries bring a second gift besides orbit refinements. They confirm that the object looked quiet when it was farther out. No sudden jump, no odd glare, just a gradual warming as it drifted into stronger sunlight. For a listener at rest, this is the narrative you want. A slow, readable rise that lets the mind follow without tensing. The pale green trace becomes a path your thoughts can stroll along, hand on the railing, no hurry in the feet. Even the way the community shares is designed for calm. Observing blocks are offered, not seized. A medium telescope coordinates with a larger one to avoid redundant exposures. The heliophysics missions note when their fields will catch the tail, and Mars side eyes put their bookmarks where parallax can teach us something about the geometry of the coma. The room, whether it's in a desert, a forest, or a university basement, sounds the same. The hush of fans, the ticking of logs, the occasional sip of something warm. All of this, scanning, pinging, confirming, back-searching, scheduling, is the understructure beneath a single quiet sentence. We saw it, we measured it, and now we know how to listen. We don't need to inflate the stakes. The rarity speaks softly for itself. Interstellar doesn't mean ominous. It means an opportunity with an expiration date, and careful people making room for that date to be met. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the lens cap hovering a few inches from the glass, the camera cooling gently, the dew heater a soft ring of warmth. Outside, the stars do not hurry, and neither do we. In that slow, shared patience, the ping becomes a conversation, and the conversation becomes a record that will let future nights be wiser than this one. The field holds. The dim trace steadies, and the frame fades to a darker quiet where the next look will begin. How far is far when a traveller moves under our sun's quiet light? Far enough to be entirely harmless, close enough to be seen if you know when and where to look. I lay out the night like a map on a wooden table, corners smoothed, lines faint, and in the margin a small note. The quiet halo will pass and keep on passing. A safe pass does not feel like suspense. It feels like a room kept at an even temperature, a hum of fans, a low white noise that says the instruments are content. When distance is measured in hundreds of millions of kilometers, the scale itself becomes a kind of lullaby. Your mind steps back, widens, and lets the numbers be tall and unthreatening while the story slows to a humane pace. The library map feeling helps. I slide my finger along the ecliptic, the way you trace a river, and I whisper the wayfinders we use: dawn, southeast, modest altitude, and note that brightness will be small, the glow diffuse, the core a smudge that needs either a patient telescope or, on a very dark morning, large binoculars held steady. A show for those who enjoy seeking quiet things. Mars had the better angle for a time, and that is a comfort too. It means parallax was generous and the geometry clean, so the sketches in our logbook are reliable. We can say, without drama, that the traveller did what many icy bodies do when they swing by a star once. It warmed, breathed out, and kept faith with the path that would carry it away again. Speed is part of the hush, oddly enough. At interstellar pace, the line feels straight to us, not looped as a local comet would be. Unbound means it will not fall into the familiar dance. It will write a single stroke, then exit the page. That single stroke is plenty for a night's lesson. How light reflects from a coma, how dust stretches into a tail that points its argument away from the sun, how motion across our sky is only the shadow of motion through space. When you plan to see something faint and far, you plan for comfort. Early alarms are gentle. You lay out a sweater, you rehearse the path from door to tripod in your mind. The traveller will rise before the sun, thin and quiet, in a part of the sky that rewards those who let their eyes adapt and their breathing settle. Nothing here is urgent. The window is broad, the pace is forgiving. There is a kind of joy in admitting that visibility will not be spectacular. The culture of spectacle is noisy. The culture of careful seeing is not. A small telescope becomes a patient tool rather than a ticket to awe. You sweep, let the mount drift, sweep again, and when a soft pearly grain appears off-centre, you do not pounce. You breathe and confirm, because in that restraint, the thing you are looking at becomes more itself. On the map table I keep beside my desk, I mark 3 waypoints in pencil. The before, when it was quieter and farther, and few knew where to look. The during, when it turned its face most squarely toward our daylight, and grew busier, brighter, but never showy. And the after, when its glow thins again, and the path angles outward, past the scribbled orbits of the giants, and on toward a cold that has no edge. The pencil marks are light enough to erase, which feels right. The sky should not be written on too heavily. If you prefer metaphors to mechanics, think of a distant ferry moving along a coast at dusk. You can see it if you know the line it follows, and you can be soothed by it, because it keeps that line without calling attention to itself. The wake is the tail, the cabin lights the coma, and the sound is almost nothing at all. Only a pressure change on the ear, the way the quiet halo seems to press gently on the dark around it. I am fond of the way safe distances make room for gratitude. Gratitude to the survey teams for the early notices, to the Mars side watchers for the second set of eyes, to the heliophysics fleet for teaching us how a tail behaves in the wind from our star. Gratitude, too, to limits, because the object never becomes gaudy. We get to practice careful seeing and unhurried thinking, which are the clean tools of science and, as it happens, of sleep. When the night is clear and your patience is full, you might try this. Step out while the house still dreams. Let your eyes drink the dark for a while. Lift glass to the region we've marked and sweep until the star field shows one soft blemish that doesn't quite snap into focus. That small flaw in perfection is the traveller, and the fact of its great distance is the very thing that makes it safe to welcome. In a library, a good map does not shout its way into memory. It fades in, colour by colour, until the route is obvious, and the mind can travel it with a finger in the air. Our chapter does the same. The safe pass leaves the page without crease or stain, only a light pencil line that dissolves when you close the book and turn down the lamp. Colour dissolve. Interstellar, whispered, means the curve does not close. It means the traveller carries momentum from a birthplace under another sun, and our star only brushes its path rather than binding it. It is a quiet word when you say it slowly, and the meaning sits neatly in the mind like a card in a weathered atlas, filed under routes that pass through, but do not return. I keep my voice low because the idea itself is large. Picture a pencil tracing a loop around the sun. That loop belongs to neighbours like the comets of the Oort cloud or the Kuiper belt. Now picture the pencil lifting and drawing a long, unbound stroke that crosses the page at a slant. A soft graphite line. That is the signature of eccentricity greater than 1. Not a circle, not an ellipse, not even a parabola that grazes and turns, but a path that keeps going once it has tasted daylight. We have met such travellers twice before in our short observing lives. The first came as a shard of possibility, with a name that sounds like a breeze across a ridge. No broad coma, no obvious tail, peculiar brightness changes, a motion that argued it did not belong. The second arrived more like what our instincts expect, icy, active, unambiguous, a classic coma blown downwind by sunlight. Both were interstellar, both were teachers, and together they gave us a vocabulary gentle enough to use tonight without raising the pulse. This third visitor we greet with better questions. We ask for the curve first, and the curve replies that it is open. We ask for the pace, and it replies that it is fast and free. We tilt instruments toward the light and begin to separate the glow into its quiet notes. In the spectra, you can sometimes catch the ordinary music of comets, water vapor warmed loose from grains, carbon dioxide breathing out, carbon monoxide tracing colder stories, and every familiar line is reassuring, because familiar does not mean local and ordinary does not mean dull. Heating near a star is an old lesson taught anew. I picture a square of ice in a morning sun and a darker fleck in its centre. The fleck warms faster, a small well forms, and vapour lifts in a thin thread. On a nucleus far out there the pattern is more complex, but the principle rhymes with the kitchen sink demonstration. Uneven surfaces, different colours and textures, cracks that open to pockets of volatile frost. Jets wake, a coma gathers, dust slips free, and the tail organises itself in the patient breeze of photon pressure and the solar wind. When origin differs, the recipe differs. The disk that fed the traveller when it formed around another star had its own balance of light elements and heavier traces, its own seasoning of icy grains and organics, its own story of heating and snowlines and shadow. So the lines we record here, those slender marks of gas and dust and heat, may fall into slightly different ratios than the blends we learnt first from our local comets. And the differences are a kind of accent rather than a warning. The way two streams can both be clear and cold, yet taste not quite the same after a long hike. I like to think of these lines as roads on that weathered atlas. A mark for water, a mark for carbon dioxide, a mark for the cyanogen band we often use to follow activity, a broad wash for dust. Each road hints at how deep the ice is layered, how compact or friable the grains might be, how quickly heat migrates inward when sunlight works at the surface. No single line tells the whole story, and that is fine. Bedtime science is happiest when the layers cooperate slowly, the way pages turn without tearing when the room is dry and still. If you listen for the grammar of motion, the subject stays the same, and the verbs change with distance. Far from the sun, the traveller does very little. Nearer, it breathes. Closer, it erodes softly, a whitening at the edge like chalk, meeting damp cloth. The coma geometry stretches or relaxes as the spin turns active regions toward and away from light. None of that implies alarm. It implies sunlight doing what sunlight does, and material doing what ancient material does when it is asked to be warm for the first time in a very long while. We keep comparisons small and courteous. Against the shard without a coma, this one's behaviour is easier to read. Against the exuberant second visitor, it may be gentler or simply different in a few lines and colours. Those contrasts are invitations, not threats. They ask us to revise models, not because something is wrong, but because the library of examples is larger now and our shelves are better labelled. A soft graphite line in the margin says, file this under interstellar, subfile under activity modest, rotation present, composition within friendly bounds. If someone hands you a fresh page and asks you to define interstellar in one sentence, you could write, an object whose orbit around the sun does not close, whose speed remains too high to be captured, whose chemistry may carry the accent of another nursery, and whose visit is brief enough that we plan our watching the way sailors plan a tide. That is enough, and it is gentle, and it leaves room for colour and texture later, in case the instruments sing more loudly than expected. Every so often I hear the worry behind a question, whether lines that differ by a degree mean there is a mystery that should keep us awake. We are honest when we say what we do not yet know. We are also kind to your sleep when we say that difference is the rule among comets, even here at home, and the shapes and strengths of their lines shift with heat, dust load, and turning. In other words, variation is not a siren, it is the way the book is written. So let interstellar stay quiet in your ear. Let it keep its meaning as a path that will not fold back on itself, a guest who signs the logbook and continues down the coast. The value is not in a twist or shock. It is in the chance to watch a page of the galaxy's handwriting glide under our lamp without smudging. We follow the letters slowly. We breathe when a jet brightens and dims, and we put the atlas away when the hour is late, a faint pencil sheen on our fingertips, where the map left its kindly dust. Soft, hard cut. The night sounds like a workshop after hours, not empty, just unhurried. A lamp with a warm cone of light, a few instruments ticking under their breath, and a table scattered with timepieces waiting to be wound. Windows and clocks. That is what observing becomes when a traveller swings through sunlight and refuses to linger. I lay the tools out in my mind, the way a careful hand sets gears in order. Rotation first, because the surface turns and shows us different faces. Illumination next, because the sun paints active regions in and out of view. Then the instruments themselves, each with its rhythm. Ground telescopes that chase the clear hours between clouds and dawn. Space telescopes that must respect heat, glare, and orbital geometry, all while keeping their mirrors steady enough to taste a faint line in the light. A window is not just a date on a calendar. It is an angle and a pace. If the object rotates in, say, a few hours, then a single night may catch multiple moods. A gentle jet pointing sunward, then turning aside, then thinning as a darker patch faces us. The cadence we choose, short exposures to follow a tremble, longer ones to smooth noise, becomes part of the story we tell about what the traveller is doing, and how quietly it does it. Handoffs stretch those windows wider. A southern observatory closes its dome, a western one picks up the same field as the stars rise, and the baton crosses continents without drama. The heliophysics images keep their patient watch for dust streams near the sun's glare, and if their wide fields happen to catch a thread of the tail, that thread adds a soft underline to everything the optical spectrographs are learning farther out. It is less a relay race than a tide table, each site meeting the moment it is best suited to hold. Spacecraft have their own clocks, and listening to them is a kind of comfort. One telescope circles Earth every hour and a half and spends part of each loop behind our planet's body, its view blocked as if a curtain were drawn across the stage. Another keeps its sunshield forever turned, allowed to look only into a ring of sky away from bright heat. Their schedules are not inconveniences. They are boundaries that make planning clean, like margins that keep handwriting legible on a long page. Even the act of pointing has a tempo. A moving target is not a blur to these machines. It is a path that the guidance systems can follow with a calm hand. Rates must stay within limits, and when they do, the traveller appears still on the detector while the fixed stars crawl. It feels paradoxical at first, then becomes second nature. Hold the visitor steady. Let the background slip. Measure quietly. Time also rules the chemistry we can hear in light. Some molecules speak more loudly at certain distances from the sun. If carbon dioxide begins to carry more of the tune, we want spectra that straddle that change, so we can tell whether the surface is layered like pastry or blended like snow packed over many winters. That means choosing windows where both rotation and sunlight cooperate, and resisting the urge to stare without pause when a better placed window is only hours away. Coordination is craft, not conquest. The team that has the clearest night does not hoard it. They post the seeing and the times, and another group plans a different slice, so we do not duplicate effort during the brief hours when geometry is kindest. If a deep integration will saturate the tale in one band, a partner may split the same time into a string of shorter looks in another band to catch a different breath of the coma. The tempo becomes a duet, and the result is a score we can hum again later when the object is gone. I like to picture an old clockmaker lifting a brass wheel with tweezers and setting it into a waiting arbor. That is what a good schedule feels like. Each observing block clicks into the next, notching neatly. So power, pointing, and people can work without friction, a cadence for imaging, another for spectroscopy, a slack hour to process the previous set so any surprises can steer the next. We are not racing. We are matching pace with a moving lesson, breathing with it. Ground and space listen differently, and that complement is deliberate. High, dry air lets a large mirror pull faint dust structure from the night with a precision that makes morphology sing. Space sees past the air entirely, following heat to places the eye cannot. Wide-field heliospheric cameras trade detail for reach, and sometimes that is exactly what a tale needs. Room to show how sunlight and the wind from our star comb it into streamers or bend it into a long, compliant arc. Every instrument has a courtesy it asks from us. The one in low Earth orbit wants you to remember. The Earth itself will block the view part of each circuit. The one far from Earth wants you to keep the sun, moon, and our own planet safely away from its line of sight, which means a traveller near the sun will be visible in 2 comfortable seasons rather than all year long. None of this is burden. It is the grammar that keeps a long conversation clear. Windows close, but often they close with a promise. The object will rotate back into a favourable pose. The geometry will slide a few degrees and make a previously tricky observation clean again. Clouds will thin, and a mountain's night will settle into steadiness just when the tale is most ready to be traced. A plan written across many clocks grants something that a single long stare cannot. The confidence that we did not mistake a passing mood for the whole character of a traveller. This is sleepy science at its best. Many hands moving slowly, many dials ticking together, a room where nothing clatters. We are not guarding a secret, we are curating a sequence, so that when someone asks later how the tail learned to lean, or whether the spectrum changed with the turning, the answers can be given without fuss, and with a timeline that fits on a single, neat card. If you've been listening with your own lamp turned low, you might feel the same exhale I do now. The cadence is set. The hands are aligned. Windows have been penciled and underlined, with enough white space left to let the night breathe. We will keep time with the traveller, and we will let the clocks carry part of the work, so our thoughts can drift, while our measurements stay exact. Breath settle. The view slides like a slow map pan from the blue limb of Earth toward a smaller red circle far away. Down there, deserts and domes. Out here, the lane between planets. Along that lane, a silver thread lifts from the dark, faint, steady, and angled just so that 2 sets of eyes can trace it from different shores of the same celestial river. Mars had the kinder angle for a while. Its orbit put it off to one side of the traveller's track, So the sunlight carved different relief into the coma and tail than we could see from home. Phase made texture, and texture made clues. When two cameras look from banks that far apart, parallax stops being a classroom word and turns into a tool you can feel. One image here, one image there, and the separation between them becoming a ruler that hides inside the sky itself. In Mars orbit, a patient instrument points and waits. The expeditionary mood suits these machines. Long loops, exacting exposure rules. No hurry. Once, years ago, those eyes watched a different comet skim the planet and taught us how a dust stream can blossom in the ultraviolet, where hydrogen tells its quiet story. The lesson stayed written into the hardware and the habits. So in early October, when our traveller passed through the geometry that favours a Martian vantage, the cadence quickened without noise. Checkpointing, take flats, listen for the faintest lift at the edge of the spectrum, where light speaks of warmed ices. From our side, ground mirrors and a few space telescopes kept to their own tempos. We watched the same thread through thicker air, and when the atmosphere wobbled a little, adaptive optics steadied the view like a hand on a railing. It's a comfort, this split attention. If a cloud sneaks across one dome, another sky is still clear. If glare from the sun makes one instrument blink, another looks from a safer angle. The river bends, but both banks remain, and the silver thread stays visible against the current. It helps to remember what a second vantage actually buys you. With parallax, the motion across any single detector is not the whole story. The change in angle between Mars and Earth lets us refine the traveller's position and speed without squeezing the numbers too hard. A small coma can look taller or flatter depending on where you're standing. The second viewpoint turns that ambiguity into a contour. Think of two sketches of the same hillside path, one drawn from the east, the other from the west. Together, they reveal the switchbacks your first drawing implied, but could not prove. Mars side instruments are also deaf to some kinds of noise that bother us here. The glow of our air falls away. The long ultraviolet breath around hydrogen can be measured with fewer distractions, and the faint field where dust scatters sunlight is more evenly dark. On our side, the reward is detail you earn with larger glass and great patience. Cross-calibration is the handshake that lets both stories become one. A timing mark in ultraviolet lined up with a brightness rise in visible light. A change in tail angle matched with a nudge in the rotation. Phase implied by light curves. You can feel the team's tone through the logs. Tight, clear notes, no exclamation marks. Sequence nominal is a kind sentence in this kind of night. The pictures and spectra won't shout, they'll hum. The thread will not blaze, it will hold. That is what we hoped for, because we want to sleep beside the data later, and sleep is best near steady things. The Martian sketches added something more than geometry. Under the right conditions, hydrogen sings softly at a wavelength our eyes cannot see, and that song grows when water-lace grains warm and release fragments that rush outward before the sunlight scatters them thin. If the instruments hear even a hint of that chorus, it pairs with Earth-side bands where carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide speak in their own keys. Multiple keys, single theme. Warming turns buried time into breath, and breath becomes light. Distances stay gentle in the middle of all this. The traveller never comes near enough to stir anxiety. tens upon tens of millions of miles between it and us. Somewhat less between it and Mars, generous margins by any practical standard. From far safety, we still receive narrow gifts, subtle bends in the tail when a solar gust catches the dust, a soft asymmetry in the coma when a patch of surface turns toward heat, a tiny change in the apparent spin rate as jets add a whisper of torque. Crosschecks keep the rhythm. An Earth observatory reports a slight elongation in the coma on a given date. The Mars side view, close to that hour, shows a complementary tilt that fits the same cause. A spectrograph here notes a modest rise in a line. A detector there logs a brightness bump in a band that ought to answer the same question from a different angle. It is all housekeeping, elegantly done. Note, compare, revise, and proceed. We leave drama at the door and carry out a quiet conversation with a guest who will not stay. In truth, the thing I love most about the Mars Vantage is how much it resembles walking a river path at dusk. From one bend, the water reads as a sheet. From the next, you can swear the current braids into three. The truth is, both views together, and only a slow walk reveals it. Our cameras walk together this time, one on each bank, and the silver thread traced the middle for us, until the banks themselves curved apart, and the chance to compare faded cleanly into night. A few nights later, we gathered the pieces like cards, positions that triangulate within tight tolerances. A spectrum that breathes a little more in one register than last week. A tail that leans just a touch further from the sun in the wide-field cameras that live to catch such posture. No single piece astonishes. The ensemble does the work. When posted to the shared ledger, the set looks like good handwriting. Measured loops, steady spacing, nothing crossed out in haste. And then the geometry drifts on. Mars rounds its bend. Earth continues along its own broad curve. The thread sinks closer to the sun's glare for a while, and then lifts into darker fields again. We let the Mars side campaign taper with thanks, and we keep the Earth side watches going with the same even breath as before. No louder, no softer, just matched to what the sky is willing to give. If you sit by a window now, the pane will be a cooler square in the room's warm air. Outside, the lane between worlds is very quiet. A reddened shore on one side, our blue one on the other, and in between, a traveller that never needed us, never threatened us, and yet gave us a better sense of how two banks make a river readable. The silver thread drifts on, thinner than before, and the window grows dark enough to hold your reflection while the dome lights dim. Moon window dim. Traveller, I'm writing to your wake. Your blue-grey ribbon lifts from the quiet of your coma and leans from the sun with a courtesy that feels older than language. You don't answer, of course, but the dust and gas you shed keep a kind of correspondence, and our instruments read the lines as they pass like letters in a steady post. The first line says light pushes. Sunlight nudges tiny grains outward, dust sorting itself by size, as a breeze might sort chaff in an old yard. Larger grains lag, drawing a thicker stroke near your path. Finer grains leap farther and paint a wider plume. A second line says wind pulls. Charged particles flowing from the sun and the magnetic fields they thread can seize light ions and drag them into a tail so straight it looks stitched onto the sky. Thus the twofold script, a soft dust brush and, when conditions allow, a slimmer ion filament. To read the letter clearly, we sometimes stack pages. A wide-field heliospheric camera takes hour after hour of faint white light frames and lays them one atop another until your ribbon's shape stands up from the noise. Another camera, riding farther from Earth, catches the same hours from a slightly different angle. Their overlap is a gentle triangulation. When both stacks agree, angle, curve, lean, we take the geometry as solid and log a note about the solar wind that night and the slow fan of dust moving in its own patient law. Closer in, the coma writes in rounder letters. It swells and leans as active regions on your turning surface come into morning and then noon, then pass into afternoon and night. On some nights, the light makes a narrow almond. On others, the edge seems longer on one side than the other, as if a seam has opened and a brighter breath is escaping. A small elongation is not a surprise. It is a map pin for where heat is working a little harder. Rotation turns the page between those map pins. A nucleus that vents unevenly gains tiny torques. The push of gas becomes a thumb on a spinning top, subtle at first, then accumulating into a change you can see in the timing of brightness humps across several nights. Jets do not need to roar to rearrange a story. They whisper often enough, and the line of your ribbon bends by fractions of a degree, a change that would be nothing if we were hurried, and is everything because we are not. Some of the script is colourless to our eyes, but sings in known keys to our instruments. When water warms and breaks, fragments announce themselves near the ultraviolet, where the OH band glows faintly. A cyanogen band writes a blue ward accent around 400 nanometers, a familiar tag in Comet Comets. Deeper in the infrared, carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide carry their own signatures, lines that sit like postal marks telling us which layers are opening and which are still sealed. The mix is the message. Ratios drift with sunlight and spin, and we follow those drifts as if watching ink spread in slow motion. Dust has its own grammar beyond simple push and pull. Different grains respond to light with different haste. Some form short braids near your path, as if tied by quiet knots. Others sweep into longer streamers that fall into place farther from your body. When a gust from the sun arrives, a change in speed or direction of the charged wind, your finer strands can flutter, even kink, the way a ribbon trembles when the shore wind sharpens at dusk. We do not need large disturbances to see this. Patience is the magnifier. On a few runs, we practice a modest trick. We let the telescope track your motions so you sit still on the detector. Then we subtract the crawling star field and lay the cleaned frames into a stack of our own. Where the white light cameras out near the solar wind give us reach, this trick gives us clarity. The dust fan shows faint ribs inside the larger fan, like letter folds inside an opened envelope. Those ribs are small histories, times and directions when more grains were sent outward, perhaps when a crack first met sun and vented fresh frost. Not every change is yours alone. The wind from the sun can braid the ion thread with its own restless pattern, sometimes turning a taut line glassy smooth, sometimes combing it into rays that blink in and out along the magnetic field's curves. If a camera that loves the space between planets reports a subtle deflection and a spectrograph closer in logs, a small rise in a line that ought to answer the same moment, we pair them and write one sentence from two alphabets, wind and warmth, both at work, both inside your ribbon's daybook. None of this reaches for drama. It is a ledger with even spacing. When the coma lengthens on its sunward edge, we write that down. When it shortens, we write that too. When the ribbon tilts 2 degrees farther from the sun than last week, we add the mark. And if the tilt relaxes next dawn, we add that second mark and feel a quiet satisfaction that the page holds both truths without strain. Steadiness is not sameness. It is the room where small differences can breathe without being mistaken for alarms. All along, the reason we read your tale so slowly is simple. The ribbon is a teacher of processes that never hurry. Sublimation from layered ice, sunlight pressing dust grain by grain, a thin plasma wind playing its soft harp along lines we cannot see, rotation whispering talk into form. Most of these we learned at home with local comets. You add an accent from elsewhere, and the sentence sounds new without breaking the grammar we trust. Traveller. I fold these pages into a packet now. Inside are stacked frames from wide fields, spectra with quietly named lines, logs from long nights, when the coma's almond leaned and then unleaned with your turn. They will travel farther than you do, oddly enough, into repositories and textbooks, into models that anticipate the 4th traveller years from now. On top of the packet, I place a stamped envelope, unaddressed, and watch it slide on a blue-grey ribbon of air toward a shoreline no one needs to defend. Shoreline hush. If we were sitting by a low fire on a clear night, I'd tilt my voice toward the embers and tell you this part as a campfire aside. The traveller is faint, the night is long, and our instruments make a quiet ensemble around it. Each plays a part, small and exact, and the sum feels like a low copper glow that holds the edges of the scene together without asking you to lean forward. First, a listener with very fine ears. The space telescope that circles Earth every 96 minutes does not stare forever. Earth itself sweeps across its view, each orbit, like a curtain gently drawn and opened again. Yet, within those clean intervals, the mirror and camera can find lacework in the coma that ground eyes cannot resolve. To track a moving guest, it nudges its pointing rate just enough that the visitor holds still on the detector while the stars crawl. A handful of orbits make a stack. The stack becomes shape and timing. The timing becomes a line in the ledger that other instruments can read. Then the instrument that never sees the sun directly, riding far beyond the weather of our air. Its shielded face keeps heat away, so it can listen for warmth from dust and gas. Some lines are inaudible to any other ear. A deep breath where carbon dioxide speaks, a close whisper where carbon monoxide answers. The rules are strict. Only a ring of sky is safe to point into, and the target must move slowly enough that the music doesn't smear. Within those gentle fences, the spectra arrive like measured chords, and the dark between them is as helpful as the notes themselves, because silence makes small changes easier to hear. Farther inward toward the sun, wide eyes watch the brightness of space itself. They are not interested in detail, they are interested in reach. The coronagraph hides the sun so that faint, white light streams can be seen around it, and the heliospheric images stare at star fields large enough to hold a tail that stretches for millions of kilometers. A tale that would be a rumor in a narrow field becomes a sentence here. Hours of frames are stacked until the streamers stand up from the background, And when a bend or a kink appears, the timestamp is exact enough to match the shift with a breeze from our star. On the ground, large mirrors breathe cold air and work with a partner that feels like magic until you've seen it a dozen times. A bright reference, artificial or borrowed from the sky, lets the optics measure the atmosphere's tremble in real time and counter it with tiny flexes of a thin mirror. The result is steadiness, where there would have been blur, and in that steadiness faint ribs appear within the dust fan. A nuclear-centered glow gains gentle texture, and the day's small lesson is no longer buried under weather. Big glass and quick corrections make a patient craft. The exposure lengths are chosen for what the night will bear. The filters are swapped with a clockmaker's grace, and the hand that guides the dome does as little as possible, because the air is teaching and the machine is listening. The music is not only in the instruments, it lives in the way the notes are carried. Raw frames become quick-look products, so the night team can pivot if a line brightens unexpectedly. Those same frames will later be calibrated more carefully, bias subtracted, flats applied, time tags checked against the observatory clock, and then placed where the community can find them again. A spectrum's first draft is enough to say the chord is changing, and the second draft, days later, is careful enough to say by how much. A corridor of small rooms holds the whole process: observation, reduction, check, release. Soft doors, quiet steps, steady hands. What looks like a crowd around the traveller is really an ensemble with rests written into the score. The fine detail eye plays when geometry is kind, then pauses while the infrared ear takes its turn. The wide-field watchers hum under everything, their long exposures stretched across hours. The ground mirrors come in and out with the weather and the moon. Handoffs keep the line unbroken. This hour belongs to the orbiting listener, the next to the infrared ear, the one after that to a mountain that is cleared, and each passes a baton made of timing marks and small, useful words. Steady, faint rise, angle, paludux, cadence held. The beauty of this is how little any one instrument must claim. The visitor doesn't need a spotlight, only a circle of shared light. A small change in reflectivity measured in the infrared means more when a high-resolution image shows the coma leaning a touch on the same night. A kink seen by a heliospheric imager becomes clearer when a ground spectrum records a breath in a band that often answers to sunlight's push. The blue story stays calm because the parts agree without argument. And if a part does not agree, the disagreement is an invitation to look again, not a cause to raise the voice. If we were at the fire now, we would let the last stick settle and watch the orange coals write a map of slow chemistry in the ash. Each instrument we've used is one coal in that bed, bright for a while, then dim, then bright again when stirred by timing and need. Together, they keep the field warm. Together, they give the traveller room to be measured without being asked to perform. We will bank the glow when dawn lifts. We will tidy the notes and leave them where the next listener can find them. And then, quiet as a hand over a lantern's cap, we ease the light out so the night can do its work without us. Lantern snuff. One breath in, one out, then 2 and 3. We count together, not to hurry the mind, but to let it find a gentle rhythm while the traveller warms. Chemistry enters on that rhythm, quiet and orderly, like a pale vapour curl rising from a meadow at dawn. 4, 5. The first notes are familiar. As sunshine touches dark grains, water finds a path to gas, and fragments of that story glow in the near ultraviolet. A little farther along, a shy band from cyanogen writes a narrow accent in blue-violet, a tag that has followed comets for generations. These are not alarms, they are signatures. A name on an envelope as the letter leaves the house. 6, 7. Deeper in the infrared, where our eyes cannot go, two quiet voices speak about colder layers. Carbon dioxide clears its throat around one wavelength. Carbon monoxide answers at another, and together they tell us how the page beneath the surface opens when heat finally arrives. If those lines swell or settle over days, we learn that layers are waking on their own timetables, some shallow, some more deeply buried, some shaded, until a turn brings them into morning. When speakers trade volume, reflectivity can trade colour. A dust coma that looked gently grey can redden a shade, the way dry grass takes on warmth in late light. Grain size has a hand in this. Coarser grains scatter light differently than fines, and the mixture slides the tone along a quiet scale. You won't see a sudden paint pot spill. You'll see a drift, a patient tendency that agrees with what we learned from many hometown comets, and from another visitor who blew through with an honest, snowy voice a few years ago. I like to think of the spectrum as a field with small flags marking where each species prefers to wave. Water's flag is near the ultraviolet, where its fragments whisper. Cyanogen's flag stands nearby. Two deeper flags mark where carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide answer in warmth. On a still morning, the flags do not all lift at once. A turn of the traveller tilts one into sun while another rests, and our instruments write the sequence, down without fuss. Early rise here, later rise there, both gentle, both compatible with ice that was put away in layers long before our star ever appeared in this traveller's sky. Sometimes the field brightens by a fraction, even when the total light stays modest. That is reflectivity shifting at the surface as dust lifts, settles, or thins. A patch that was crusted can freshen, exposing cleaner ice, and the albedo changes just enough that careful photometry can feel it. Not a makeover, only a polish on a single stone in a garden path. The pale vapor curl drifts and reforms, and the colour moves a breath warmer or cooler, while the physics hold steady underfoot. Grain stories carry through the tail. Close to the nucleus, where dust is young, you might find small, bright flecks that scatter a little bluer. Farther out, after sunlight and the solar wind have pressed and sorted the flow, redder tones can prevail as larger grains lag and finer ones sprint downwind. It is not a rule to be recited. It is a tendency to be weighed against the night's seeing, the instrument's reach, and the traveller's unrepeatable history. On nights when our patience is high and the air is still, we can weave colour and chemistry into a single, sleepy braid. A modest lift in cyanogen's line across 2 sessions. A small rise in the dust's reddening slope the next dawn. A barely brighter whisper from carbon dioxide as the phase angle changes and a fresh facet sees light. None of these alone would make a headline. Together, they sketch a layered interior where shallow pockets wake early and deeper seams wait for their hour. If you remember the earlier traveller who came with a clear, classic tale and a confidence that made spectrometers smile, you'll recall how its dust leaned toward familiar colors, even as some volatiles spoke more loudly than we expected. Our guest now is quieter, but the grammar is similar. Differences are accents, not arguments. Each accent tells us about the nursery, where the object first learned to be ice, what elements were plentiful, how the early heat lamps of its star fell across its cradle, how grains collided and fused and waited for a launch no one here saw. The meadow image helps. Before sunrise, thin mist rises in curls wherever the ground gives up last night's chill. One corner breathes first because it faces east. Another waits because a low wall keeps it in shadow. The field is one, yet it wakes in pieces. So does chemistry at a comet's surface. A pale vapor curl from the sunny notch. A slower exhale from the rougher patch. The mist gathers, the day warms, and the pattern shifts again by noon, all without drama, all within the rules of light and frost. When reflectivity changes, we keep our pencils sharp. Some brightening is just geometry, the way sunlight paints a curve as the angle softens. Some is true surface change, as jetting rearranges dust, reveals cleaner ice for a while. Cross-checks keep us honest. A photometric rise that lands on the same hour as a spectral nudge carries more weight than either alone. If the rise never reappears at the same rotation phase, we call it a mood, not a message, and we sleep just fine. Even silence is useful. A line that doesn't lift can be as informative as one that does. If water fragments plateau while carbon dioxide grows, the pattern tells us which pantry was closer to the door when sunlight knocked. If the color stays neutral on a night we hoped for warmth, perhaps the grains are larger than we guessed, or the angle simply kept sparkle out of reach. Absence is not a gap. It is a contour that keeps the map proportional. I want you to feel, in this gentle tally, how far from alarm these shifts live. We are not hunting for a reveal. We are listening for balance. The reassurance comes from agreement across simple things. Warmer sun, brighter breath, different angle, different tone, layered ice, staggered opening times. The pale vapor curl is a teacher that never raises its voice, and our task is to write legibly while it passes. If a future traveler arrives with louder chemistry, we will be ready with the same soft methods. Tonight, the lesson is moderate. The field lifts its light flag. The tail leans a degree more when the wind freshens. The color moves half a step as grains sort themselves for the long road outward. The train of measurements pulls away as slowly as a night train, leaving a small station. Windows lit, wheels subdued, a steady rhythm counting breaths between fence posts as it slips into the dark. Night train recede, low, lower, lowest. The rhythm I hold for you now is a lullaby in threes, a soft triad that turns like a music box key between finger and thumb. Under that turn, the traveller spins. Not a whirl, not a wobble to worry over, only a measured rotation that carries bright patches into morning and back to night, while a turning brass pin inside the box keeps time. 3 notes again. Light, heat, breath. When sunlight warms a vent, gas lifts and pushes from one side more than the other. That push is a tiny hand on the rim of a wheel. Over hours, it is nothing you can feel. Over days, it becomes a change. You can read in the spacing of brightness humps. The torque is not dramatic. It is cumulative. A visitor does not need to roar to lean. It only needs to exhale unevenly as the surface turns through noon. Across nights, we write the same gentle figures. A rise in the light curve, a return to baseline, another rise, a little out of phase if the vent has shifted or the jet sharpened. In ordinary comets, these cycles can walk a period forward or back by minutes or more across a season. That is a lesson learned at home and kept in the quiet tools we use here. The first handful of measurements is an overture. The score becomes clearer as more bars are added and the rests are honoured as much as the notes. Remember how a top slows when a breath of air touches it. The change at first hides inside the spin. Then a mark on the rim drifts from where you expect it. So it is with the traveller. We align images so the guest stands still and the star field slides. Then we measure the light inside a small aperture and let time do its sorting work. When the peaks creep, we test whether geometry made the mischief or whether the music box truly lost a fraction of a turn. Jets explain more than they announce. A narrow fan can favour one longitude, and if that face catches sun just so, the nucleus receives a nudge aligned with its own tilt. That nudge becomes a minuscule correction to spin. In some comets, spacecraft have watched such torques lengthen or shorten a day by slices of an hour. In others, ground light curves alone have told the story. Peaks marching to new positions, then holding there once the vent's mood steadied. The grammar is the same in each case. Outgassing whispers, rotation listens, the day length adjusts a little. Models arrive where patience meets pattern. We take a curve and propose a cause. A jet here, an albedo patch there, a period that breathes shorter after perihelion, longer in late season. Then we let the next night judge the proposal. If the phase lines up again, we keep the draft and refine it. If not, we revise and remind ourselves that surfaces are mosaic, not uniform cloth. The cadence is data, model, data, with no appetite for triumph, only for a better fit, a quieter residual. The orbit itself hears these sighs as well. Gas leaving the surface does not only touch spin, it presses the traveller's path by a hair against the sun's pull. Orbit solvers add small terms for that pressure, then watch the path settle into a solution that lands where the sky says it should. A traveller on a single pass needs that courtesy too, even if the effect is small. The elegance lies in balancing gravity's grammar with breath's footnotes, so the line across the page stays true within the width of a pencil lead. Instruments help us separate what turns from what only brightens. A coma that leans is not necessarily a nucleus that speeds up. Reflectivity can change without a clock changing. So we pair the photometric pulse with shapes resolved at higher detail, and we check whether the pulse repeats when the same face returns to noon. Repetition is a gentle signature. Random lifts are weather. In sleep science and sky science alike, repetitions are the calmest teachers. You can hear the ensemble holding this triad from different chairs. The wide-field watchers say, the tail bent a little when the solar wind shifted. The infrared ear says, a line grew softly in the window after that. The fine detail eye says, a jet appeared like lace for 2 orbits and then thinned. Together, they allow us to choose between the clock changed and the lighting changed, without raising the voice or the pulse. Not every traveller is mild. Some neighbours in our records have doubled their day length in a season, their vents acting like oars that push against emptiness with surprising leverage. Others have shortened a day by minutes when a southern patch found sun and sang. These are precedents, not predictions. They anchor our sense of scale, showing how small forces make tidy changes over patient spans. Against such a library, a quiet guest looks even more at ease. All the while, safety stays outside the frame of worry. Changes in spin live far below anything that would break a visitor or tilt it from its long, unbound lane. The non-gravitational terms are housekeeping, not hazard. The numbers settle into orbit solutions the way a footnote settles under a calm paragraph. We keep solving because we like clean margins, not because we fear a surprise in the next line. It helps to picture the mechanism rather than the math. A music box with a figure on top, turning. The spring unwinds at a pace set by design, yet your hand on the key can slow or hasten the dance by a breath if you touch it while it moves. Sunlight is the hand, jets are the gentle pressure, and the figure, our traveller, turns a little faster here, a little slower there, still within the song, still poised on the brass pin that gives the motion its centre. Toward the end of the arc, we often see the clock settle. Outgassing fades as heat slips away, and the period finds a steady value that sits politely beside the earlier one in the logbook. Light curves flatten, jets go to sleep. The tail becomes more dust than breath. The modelling ends not with a flourish, but with a check mark and a date. The kind you write at the end of a page you are pleased to leave tidy. Tonight's triad, talk, timing, temper, has been quiet on purpose. We are not hunting a twist, we are keeping count. 3 beats, again and again, until your breathing is the metronome, and the sky's small motions are notes you can follow without leaning closer. The key turns, the lid lowers, the last phrase lingers in the felt-lined air. Slow fade to black. Let's try a quiet thought experiment. Suppose the night sky came with a small switchboard, its bulbs winking like distant towns along a coast. Each bulb marks an instrument, and each instrument holds a slice of time. A protocol in this room of faint lights is simply the card that tells us which switches to press, in what order, and for how long. Not sirens, not secrets, only coordination, so the traveller's passage becomes a continuous line instead of scattered dots. You and I can sit at that board and set the rules with calm hands. We list the windows when geometry is kind. We pencil in who looks first, who follows, and who listens from the heliophysics seats where the sun's breath is measured. We agree on pauses to process and compare. We add a small contingency note for clouds or glare. By the end, the sheet reads like a tide table for light, its columns just neat enough that anyone stepping in at midnight could take a breath and keep the cadence without asking for a meeting. On a second page, we keep room for the now. Quick-look reductions glide through the pipeline, framed by timestamps that act like a muted semaphore from one facility to the next. If a line brightens, the flag lifts. If nothing changes, the flag rests at half height. Either way, the signal is courtesy, not clamour. Analysts read the notes in a side room where the fans murmur and the monitors glow low, then post a short line to the ledger that the rest of us can lean on before the next window opens. The speed is useful. The tone is gentle. Cross-mission timing belongs on that same card. The Mars side orbiters get their slice during favourable phase. The spaceborne solar watchers hold their long stare near the glare, where tails can be traced in white light. The infrared ear waits for a safe elongation and a slow enough apparent rate that nothing smears. Ground mirrors take the weathered hours between. The baton passes without drama because the handoff is written into the protocol, which is only a plan to keep our attention unbroken while the traveller keeps its own pace. Closer to the ground, support rings keep the plan resilient. A spectroscopy cue at one mountain pairs with imaging at another, so we do not ask one sight to be two things at once. Adaptive optics stands by when the air steadies, and wide-field images go to work when a finer eye would be wasted by thin cloud. If a storm closes a dome, a partner site lifts its shutter and takes the slot. There is no worldwide scramble here, only capacity used the way a good workshop uses its benches. One task fitted to each space, with elbows clear and tools where they can be reached in the dark. Ethics live on the card as well. We promise to avoid language that inflates the stakes. We promise to post what we can as soon as calibration makes it honest. We promise to repeat safety plainly when we speak in public, so that listeners who drift to sleep beside our work do not wake to unnecessary heat. If a discrepancy appears, we label it a question first, not a claim. If a pattern persists, we show the receipts in data the community can retrace. Quiet science is still accountable. It simply prefers receipts to rhetoric. There is also kindness to the listener built into a good protocol. We space the densest hours away from each other so the story can breathe. We plan 1 or 2 ambient sequences, where the cameras simply hold the tail and let time do its long arithmetic while nothing new is said aloud. We tuck the housekeeping into natural lulls. We lean on familiar metaphors. Clocks, river bends, a harbour at even tide, so the mind can rest while the facts assemble. The choreography is considerate of sleep even as it is faithful to the sky. In practice, the notes look simple when they're right. Start-end times, instruments, rates, filters. A column for quick look delivery, a column for the calibrated handoff. A line reminding us which team will speak first if a press call is requested, and what that sentence should include. Interstellar, unbound, safely distant. Observations prioritized for science value, no hazard indicated. Even the no's are helpful here. No speculation, no emergency framing, no promises beyond the next scheduled look. The muted semaphore blinks once more, and the night turns another page. At the end of shift, the dome shutters roll down with the softness of a theatre curtain. Notes slide into their folders. The switchboard dims to a quiet scatter of afterglow. On the far side of the world, another dome wakes and lifts its panels, and the plan we left behind becomes a map in someone else's hands. This is what protocol really is. A choreography of attention that privileges steadiness over spectacle, shared craft over solitary heroics. We clear our throats once, check the clocks, and let the curtain drift. I open a small, calm notebook and trace a slow checklist with a blunt pencil. Not a tally of drama, only a quiet sum of what the traveller has taught us. A dim golden tick marks each line as we go, steady as a clock under cloth. First line, the path does not close. Eccentricity greater than 1. Speed that never quite bows to the sun, an origin written elsewhere. The curve is open, the visit brief, and we shaped our nights around that simple grammar. The word interstellar stayed small in the mouth, and large in meaning. Second line, distances were kind. Perihelion came and went at a healthy remove. Earth's nearest day sat far enough away to keep every sentence in the register of reassurance. We planned because the window was scarce, not because the window was dangerous. The night listens better when safety is explicit. Third line, chemistry spoke in familiar keys. Water's fragments in the near ultraviolet, cyanogen's narrow blue-violet. Deeper in the infrared, quiet CO2 and CO, telling us about layers that woke on their own schedules. Ratios breathed in step with rotation, and with sunlight's angle, different enough to sound like an accent, close enough to ground us in the physics we trust. Fourth line, shape carried stories. A coma leaning a little more on some nights, a dust fan with faint ribs inside the larger brush, an ion thread that straightened or kinked when the wind from our star changed its pressure. None of it theatrical, all of it legible if he gave the frames time to stack and the patterns room to repeat. Fifth line, rotation answered to breath. Jets did not shout, they nudged. Light, curves shifted by small, polite steps, and models kept pace without declaring victory. When a face turned to noon, a vent took the hint. When dusk returned, the note softened. The day length may have moved by fractions. The clock stayed whole. Sixth line, two banks made the river clearer. Earth and Mars saw together for a while, and the separation between those views became a ruler. We could hide in the sky. Parallax tightened positions. Phase angles drew texture from the coma. Ultraviolet ears heard what ground glass could not. One thread, two shores, better confidence. Seventh line, instruments sang as an ensemble. A fine detail eye in low orbit, an infrared ear in deep shade, wide eyes near the sun's glare, big mirrors breathing cold mountain air. Each took a turn, and then rested. The rests were part of the music. Handoffs were gentle, and the ledger grew without crossings out. Eighth line, protocol meant courtesy. Windows penciled to overlap, quick look notes shared with timestamps, calibrated releases following at a pace that favored accuracy over speed. Public words stayed plain, unbound, safely distant, science first. We left room for sleep in the cadence and room for revision in the margins. Ninth line, comparison gave meaning without noise. Against the shard with no coma, this guest was easier to read. Against the confident snowball from a few years past, it was quieter, but true to the same grammar. Differences taught history rather than hinting at secrets. The nursery elsewhere left an accent. It did not rewrite the alphabet. 10th line, what we carry forward is craft, schedules that respect rotation and light, pipelines that put first drafts in the right hands while second drafts ripen, a habit of pairing spectra with shape and shape with wind until a shared answer appears. The next traveller, whenever it comes, will meet a room that already knows where the switches are and how softly to press them. 11th line, for listeners, the lesson stays kind. Rarity does not require alarm. Long stories can be told at low volume and still be complete. Sleep and science are not adversaries when the facts are allowed to stand in even light. 12th line, gratitude, written small. To teams who keep late lamps burning without haste. To instruments that listen past our air. To a visitor that passed without needing us, and nonetheless left a few good pages in our logbook. We close the notebook, lay the pencil across it, and hear the benign murmur of the clock under cloth. The ticks slow, then soften, then tuck themselves beneath the room's own hush. Clock murmur taper. You can let the room dim all the way now. Keep only the small light you need to find the pillow's cool edge. We have walked a quiet circle together. A visitor from another sun, a safe and distant curve, and a set of instruments that listened without hurry while the night stayed. Kind, observed things make soft companions for sleep. We saw a path that will not close. We heard ordinary chemistry, water's fragments, a shy blue-violet tag, deeper whispers from carbon's colder stores. We felt how a tail leans in the wind from our star, and how a small jet can nudge a rotation by the width of a breath. None of it asked for alarm. All of it invited patience. Teams shared their hours as if passing lanterns along shoreline. High mirrors resolved gentle texture. Infrared ears traced warmth. Wide fields caught the faintest streamers. Mars lent a second angle when the geometry was kind. Notes were posted, checked, and folded into a ledger that will help with the next guest whenever it chooses to cross our sky. If your eyes are closed, keep them that way. Let the cadence we kept become your cadence. In, out. The long, even line of a traveller that never needed to stop here to matter. Gratitude is a quiet blanket. Thank you for listening, for trusting a low voice, for choosing a path through sleep that keeps the facts simple and the wonder small enough to hold. I'll leave the dome shuttered and the notebook on the table. The clock under cloth is steady, and the night beyond the glass is steady too. May your breathing follow that steadiness into the softest dark. Good night.